I am Sergio Cruz, and today I'm going to teach you how to gradually upgrade an existing Angular 1 app into Angular 2. I'm going to do so by showing you a sample app, and then we'll be upgrading a small part of that app. If you're familiar with Angular, we'll be upgrading just one directive, and that will just give you some insight on the process of Angular, upgrading your existing Angular app into Angular 2. So I'm a developer and instructor at Code School, codeschool.com, and I just help people learn new technologies. That's what I'm passionate about. So hopefully we'll be doing some learning here together today. So my keyboard works. There we go. So this is the app we will be running the upgrade on. So as we can see here, I can type the name of a city, and there's a little preview that pops up in the bottom. This preview is a directive, and that's the directive that we will be upgrading from Angular 1 to Angular 2. Now, I'll be showing this, the link to the GitHub repo at the end as well, but in case you wanted to start checking it out, this is what it's under right here. But yeah, let's jump right in. So the goal for this talk is to run Angular 1 and Angular 2 at the same time. The strategy that we'll be using is something like Angular 1 will be, the main Bootstrap app sitting on the outside, and then we'll have a sub-Angular 2 app that lives right within it, but then they'll be able to communicate with each other. So before we jump into Angular 2 and whatnot, let me just give you a quick glimpse into how Angular development has been, at least for me personally, over the years, how things changed, just so that we can understand how we got here, why TypeScript, why, Angular 2 kind of thing. Hopefully this will help shed some, light into it and get you excited about eventually upgrading your Angular 1 apps into Angular 2. So I think I put some approximate dates on here. They're not really 100% accurate, but when I got started, probably around 2013, I was placing a bunch of manual script tags on the screen. So I just used an backend MVC framework. At the time, it was believed Zend framework with PHP. And so, that framework handled all of my routes and everything. So I just had Angular sitting within one, it was basically one component in the screen that was a little bit more interactive than other parts, and we just didn't just want to use jQuery and whatnot. We just wanted to start experimenting something new. And the way we went about doing that is we would say, go to the jQuery website, download the source code, put that on our repository, and include that on the page in a script tag, as we can see up here. Same thing for Angular. Just download the Angular source code, put it on our repository, include it in and whatnot. And then I would write my own code, so we can see up here controllers/main.js, or about.main.js. So, very manual process. There was, no minification, no build process or anything like that. So eventually I got into playing around with Yeoman. Anybody here play with Yeoman before? Cool, okay. So for those of you who don't know, Yeoman just helps you scaffold apps, and it's also a generator. So if, say you're building an Angular 1 app and you want to just, write a new controller, instead of going in there and having to create the controller file manually, like you just run a little command on the CLI, and it does all of that for you and gives you, a bit of a starter code for an Angular 1 controller back in the day. So this helped me. So this was when I transitioned from just, having Angular sitting in, one little container in the site to like actually using, a fully fledged single page application kind of thing. So now Angular was actually managing all of the routes for me and everything. And the way it did that, it used something called Bower to bring in dependencies. So I was no longer reaching out to, going to the websites and downloading the source codes. Now I could use a dependency or a package manager to do that for me. It also included a few CLI commands, so we could, there was a build process, and things would get grouped. So, all of our say all of our vendor files would get grouped into one single vendor file, and that would get, minified, uglified, all of the, fancy things that, browsers liked at the time because it was more efficient. So, and that was really cool. But there was a problem. We had a build step, and that was awesome. But the problem was, when you're just placing script tags on the page, when you declare one variable in the global space, other files will also have access to those variables. Think about it. That's how jQuery works, right? We can go in, download the jQuery source code, include that in the script tag, and somehow the script tag makes the jQuery or even the $ variable available to all of our application. That was set in the global namespace. And that's, for the jQuery use case, that's great. But when you're just making a larger app and, running into that risk of accidentally declaring global variables and, kind of leaking that into other files and whatnot, like it just gets a little weird. So I started just coding very defensively, writing a bunch of self-executing functions so that, variables just wouldn't leak to, the outside world kind of thing. And I found myself doing a lot of that manually, and that's when I kind of stopped using Yeoman. There were better generators at the time too that used the things to protect against that, but that's when I kind of started playing around with Browserify. Now, what Browserify did, anybody here used Browserify or knows what it is? All right, I like how as I'm progressing through it, like less and less people are familiar with these tools. So don't let me lose you. If things get too confusing, feel free to stop me and I'll be happy to explain. So Browserify, now with Browserify, we got to use, more like Node.js kind of code. So instead of using Bower like we were before, we just could use Node, the Node package manager to bring in dependencies, NPM. We got to put these weird things on our code called requires, and they would just bring in the external dependencies for us, and every time the build step would go through things, all of our files would basically get wrapped in a function, and the dependencies that we needed would just, kind of get injected in automatically. So there's that risk of leaking global variables just wasn't there anymore. Just basically for free, we got to, take advantage of just, safely just declaring variables at the top of the file and not having to care about, somehow that variable overriding others and whatnot. So that was pretty cool. So again, we got to use the NPM modules, and then one thing I didn't mention was that we got to use ES 2015 style of code as well. ES 2015 was when, that new version of JavaScript that got finalized, and some really smart people developed something called Babel that works as a plugin on top of Browserify. So now we could use the latest and greatest of the JavaScript language, but still, transform that code back into normal JavaScript code that our browsers could understand today. So that was pretty cool. And I got that for free by using Browserify. It was just a bit more tooling that we were bringing in, and just most of everything was automated anyway, so it was kind of cool. It was cool to just bring things in and have more capabilities as I went. So, and to get shipped, all that code would get bundled into one single file, and also had the option of minifying and doing all of the fancy things that we wanted to do. So that was pretty cool. So that was, again, around 2015 or so. Dates aren't really that accurate, like I said. But then, so again, no global variables or anything, but then 2016 came around, and things got really crazy in the JavaScript world. Not like they weren't in 2015, but it's just getting worse and worse, right? Like things are moving faster and faster. Now again, since this talk is about Angular, this is when Angular 2 had its first release candidate. And now what? Like, how do we go about building our apps when we go from just placing script tags on the page to Yeoman to Browserify? How do we do that now? Should we be using TypeScript? I mean, that's kind of what people are recommending. I understand it's not a requirement, but how do we go about doing that? Should we use System.js? The first demo versions of Angular 2 apps they had out there used System.js to kind of, showcase on how things worked. So, we kind of started wondering, is that how we're supposed to be doing things from now on? Should we just migrate? Should we rewrite our apps from scratch? I mean, how do we even, like, what's really going on there? Well, things are confusing for sure, but let me let you into the strategy that I've personally have been using on my personal apps as far as, just taking things to the next level. So like I said, upgrading from Angular 1 to Angular 2. I've been gradually upgrading them. What that means is, for example, we're talking about TypeScript, right? Well, within Browserify, I'm still using that, but instead of transpiling with Babel, I'm now using TypeScript. And that allowed me to still use TypeScript with Angular 1, with my Angular 1 apps. But when I start upgrading with Angular 2, Angular 2 plays a lot nicer with Angular 2 plays a lot nicer with TypeScript. So, it just kind of make things easier. Now, it sounds kind of simple. Yeah, you're just replacing one thing with another. It was definitely easier said than done. It took some work, but it was okay. And by the way, if you're not using Browserify and you prefer something like Webpack, anybody here heard of Webpack and have used it? Cool. Okay, so Webpack is similar to Browserify. It's just a little bit more modern. So if you're using something like that, again, the same thing is possible. Instead of just transpiling and having the cool modern code, transpiled from Babel over to normal JavaScript code that the browser could understand, now we're using TypeScript. So that's pretty cool. So this simple app that we'll be upgrading today, let me share a little bit of the architecture that we use to build it. So we're using Angular 1.5, but I am not using the new dot component syntax just yet. Now, the reason for that was because this was an older app that I have been upgrading from Angular 1.3 to 1.4 to eventually 1.5 and so on. So I was just haven't gotten to the newer, Angular 1 syntax kind of thing. I am using UI Router, Gulp, Browserify, and Babel. And this is what the application structure looks like. We have an app directory on there. In the app directory, we have an app.js. App.js is, basically what bootstraps our Angular 1 file. It kind of brings it all together. Then we have a weather app weather directory. And in that directory is where we set things up, anything and everything that's related to weather, which is what this app is about. So that's where, reaching out to the APIs to, get information about a certain weather, well, there's a weather service in there. We have routes that are related to weather, so the routes are in there, and the controllers are in there. So it's kind of how I like to group my code. And you know what? Let me just show you what that looks like in practice real quick, if that's okay. So let me go into the demo 1 branch. Oop. See, I told you I was going to mess things up in the live demo. But it's okay. All right, so npm start. Now, what npm start does is it creates a little local server for us, and it'll open the browser so that anytime I make changes to my JavaScript files, the browser will reload automatically so that we can, see, the changes that we made right away. So that's what I'm using here. So let's start out with the, let's see. Let's go into the directory structure. If I zoom in a little bit, we can see the structure that we've talked about previously. So if we go into app.js, we're importing Angular, importing UI Router, and then we're importing the weather module. Again, all the code related to module. And this is, just the root of our app. What, brings Angular together and kind of makes it run. So we're naming our root module as app, and that's why we get to go to index.html and run ng app on here with the identifier app. And that's what, kind of kick things off for us. So then if we go into weather, we can see a couple of routes here. So just indicating what the view should be for the root route and the name of the controller. Also, if we're checking out, so if we look at the app here, if I type Little Rock, we see the little preview under here. And then if we click on Get Weather, we just get to see, a different view with a little bit more information about the weather in Little Rock. So, that's the app. That is a different route, as we can see up here. Went to /weather/US/Little Rock, and that is because of the second route right here, and it uses a different controller. So, that's the gist of our application. Now, if I go into main.html, which is where we'll be doing most of the work, down here, I'm using this weather preview directive. This is the almighty directive that we'll be upgrading from Angular 1 to Angular 2. So won't give you too much information about it. If you want to check out the code with more details later, feel free to go into the GitHub repository and check that out. But anyway, the directive itself, this is how we define it right here. We have a template, declared it right in line there. I didn't declare like an external HTML file for it or anything. It receives an argument or an attribute. I don't know what the proper term is for this anymore, which is the weather object. What that is when we reach out to the server, to the API and get an object back, we pass that in, and then the directive will show up if that weather property is present, and we'll just display the correct icon for it. So again, let's see, Little Rock. So we get a little icon on here with the degrees and the name of the town. So this is all here. So pretty standard Angular things if you're familiar with Angular. And then last but not least, let me just show you the GOP file real quick to kind of build things. Just wanted to show you, if we go down here, we're using Browserify, like I said. app/app.js is our root file where things get started, and then we're using something called Babel or Babelify to transform code from ES 2015 over to code that the browser can understand today. So all of that, what I just described, this is how it works. Again, if you want to really dig in and understand how all of this works, it's all on GitHub. Feel free to, just dig in there, ask questions. That's what I'm here for. So that's our app. So that's how things work. Let's get back to the slides. Cool. So what are the steps that we need to take before gradually upgrading this app? How do we get to the cutting edge while we're still playing safe, right? Things are moving really fast, and some of us have really large apps, and we can't just afford to just drop the whole thing and build a new one. It's just not how it works. And at the same time, as we're upgrading things, we want to make sure that the things we upgrade aren't going to break everything else. So how can we do this, kind of get to the cutting edge while staying pretty safe? Well, these are the steps I've been taking. I've been transpiling with TypeScript instead. So instead of just using Babel, I'm using TypeScript today, even for Angular 1 things. That just makes things easier. So when I want to eventually bring in Angular 2, it's, just the TypeScript is there, and it does make things a bit more straightforward to work with. Then we bring in the Angular 2 libraries into the current project. And number 3, we'll convert the directive so in our case, the weather preview, we'll be upgrading that to an Angular 2 component. Now, if we were upgrading a whole app and we're doing it gradually, the idea would be let's upgrade all of the easier directives that are just lower hanging fruits that we can upgrade up to the point that we just have upgraded everything, kind of change, how controllers work into a, more, Angular 2 friendly components kind of thing. As we get there, once we're done and have upgraded everything, then we can just go ahead and get rid of Angular 1 and just let Angular 2 do the job. That's the whole idea here. So I will walk you through and do live demos on those 3 steps. And again, number 1 was transpiling with TypeScript. So how can we go about replacing Babel with TypeScript in our current build structure there with GOP and Browserify and whatnot? Well, the first thing we need to do is bring in TypeScript to our current project. And that involves creating a little file as well at the root of our application called tsconfig. This just shells TypeScript, just gives it little configurations on how it goes about compiling and the features that are supported and whatnot. Then we'll go ahead and rename app.js to app.ts. TS stands for TypeScript. Renaming these files kind of helps us keep track of what files have been upgraded and which ones haven't. This is not a hard requirement. If you just leave the extension as .js and still use TypeScript, related, functionality in there, things will still work. But again, it's just nicer for us as we're upgrading. We're kind of, visualizing what's been upgraded and what has not. Next thing we need to do is bring in typings. This is what lets TypeScript know how to detect if we're passing, say, wrong arguments and things like that. That's how we can take advantage of a typed system even within JavaScript. That's what TypeScript is all about. Some of us have come from C# or Java or even C, more typed structure kind of language, and we kind of miss that. So TypeScript gives us that. But the problem is some libraries aren't built like that. So how can we get advantage of that? Well, that's what typings gives us. Typings will, just lets us know, say jQuery, well, what arguments is the jQuery function expecting? And if we pass anything that's not supported, TypeScript at the compile step will yell at us, and that's good. I also added a little post-install script to always install the typings. This is more so for my system, probably a necessary detail. And then tsify. I showed you Babelify, which was the Babel plugin to go from just go from ES 2015 code back to code that the browser understands today. Instead of using that plugin, we'll be using the TypeScript version of it, and that's it. And then we'll have to update a couple of files. TypeScript is a little bit more strict as far as syntax. It tries to stay a little bit more true to the language spec as far as ES 2015 is concerned. So we'll have to change a couple of files. And you know what? Let's do that together. That'll be our second live demo. So let's get to it. All right, so so I now renamed app.js to app.ts, as we can see up here. And the compiler is actually yelling at us. This is what TypeScript looks like when you do something it doesn't like. It just gives you feedback right there and then. And it's letting us know that there's something wrong in the first line of that app.js or app.ts file. So turns out this one kind of took me forever to figure out. Just the way the Angular 1 app was built, I don't know why, to be honest with you. I haven't looked deeply enough into the code base, but when you call require on it while using TypeScript, it sets some global variables for us that other places inside of Angular needs it. So we just went ahead and used a manual require statement. Again, TypeScript still supports CommonJS just fine, so that's cool. And then the other problem was UI router. UI router isn't really built using ES 2015 or even TypeScript code, so it doesn't have like explicit exports like, for example, this weather/jx does. If I were to look into that file, I'm explicitly exporting this variable right here, weather module, and that's how I'm able to import it in just fine. Now with this one, it doesn't have like a default or anything, so we'll have to use this other syntax, still perfectly acceptable within ES 2015. It just captures, if a library is using something like CommonJS, it'll just capture anything and everything it tried to export and bundle it all into this one UI router variable, and this does exactly what we need. And then there's one last file I need to touch, which is the exact same problem as UI router. It was the debounce function from Lodash. I'm using debounce so that every time I type like the name of a town or a city here, it only makes the request after 600 milliseconds. That's what the debounce function does. So it waits until I'm done typing for at least 600 milliseconds before making that API call. So, we need debounce to work, so we just need to change that little syntax on there, and that should have made the compiler stop yelling at us and get things going. So just give it a second, and hopefully, if I look at the console, do I have any more errors? No. I type Orlando. I'm sorry, Orlando is where I'm from, so I'll be typing a lot of Orlando here. My apologies. But so Orlando works, Las Vegas, does that work too? Cool. All right, so things are working again. So big difference now. App still looks completely the same, but the big difference is now we're using TypeScript instead of Babel. So we could use some TypeScript functions. I don't know if I were to declare a variable, say, foo, I could declare, just the type, like it needs to be a string kind of thing. And let's do a let. And if I were to reset the foo into something like 1, then, TypeScript will yell at us, hey, no, that's supposed to be a string. Why are you trying to give it a number kind of thing? So that's what, again, the typed system, that's what TypeScript gives us. Cool, so that's the second part of the live demo. So let's keep going. So next step will be to bring in Angular 2 into the picture. So now we got TypeScript, we're ready for Angular 2. Now Angular 2 has quite a few packages that we need to get things running. It's quite a lot. I'm not gonna lie, it looks a little intimidating, but it's not terrible, I guess. So I am using the latest version, which as of right now is 2.1 of Angular 2. So these are the libraries. Bring those in using npm. And here are the remaining steps that we need to get things going. So we need to get the upgrade adapter ready. What upgrade adapter is that's what allows our both versions of Angular to work together at the same time. So we need to, instantiate a new, make a new instance of that class, but also make sure that our app always uses the same instance of it. It needs to be a singleton. Now, this is quite easy when we're using Browserify. We just, set it once and export that, and we're guaranteed that the file will only be ran once, so it's not too bad. So we'll create a new file called NG2-upgrade, and we'll be exporting that function or that variable, and that's what we'll be using as we upgrade things slowly, and you'll see what that looks like in just a bit. Second thing is manually bootstrapping Angular 1. I showed you that we're using the ng-app in our index.html. Instead of doing that, we're going to do a manual bootstrap. And the reason for that is so that later we can, instead of just compiling with the Angular, or instead of bootstrapping with Angular 1, we'll be using the upgrade adapter to bootstrap things with. And the upgrade adapter will be smart enough to bring in Angular 2 when needed, and when not needed, it'll just kind of yield back to Angular 1. It's kind of mind-boggling, I'm not going to lie, conceptually, but it just works, and it works really well. So let's do these during this next live demo. And I'm almost done, I promise. Any questions so far? Did I lose anybody? Crickets. Okay. Let's get in. Demo 3, npm start. So here we got app.ts. So let's go into index.html. So here, instead of using ng-app, since we want to eventually upgrade, we'll be getting rid of this. So let's just delete it. And our app here on the left will eventually go blank because we're not, passing it the name of the app anymore. Now notice this is on the body, right? So how can we go about doing this? So on here, we can use angular.bootstrap, and we can just use document.body. So we're passing it where we want it to be bootstrapped with. Then we pass it an array with the name of the application. Now, this is the same identifier that would have been in ng-app. When I save this, just takes it a second, and just things should get going here on the left. There we go, there they are. So that's pretty cool. Now, I also made that new file I had mentioned, which is called ngupgrade.ts. ngupgrade is exporting an instance of the upgrade adapter. So that's what we'll be using to bootstrap our application from here on. So we know that things work, that things are fine with Angular 1, but will they work with Angular 2? Let's check it out. Just import it down here. So upgrade adapter from ng2 minus upgrade. And then over here, we'll replace the Angular 1 version from, just Angular to the upgrade adapter, to the instance of that, what was it called? Upgrade adapter class. Now, this is the first time we bring in Angular 2 into the picture, so that will have taken just a little longer to get things going. And apparently there's a problem. What did I do wrong? App.ts on line 11. Say what? Oh, you're right. Oop, not here. So glad we're doing this together. Thank you. Told you things would go wrong. Awesome. So now that we have Angular 2 here, it'll start, like the compile step will start taking a little longer to run because Angular 2 is, quite larger, and especially as we're having, both apps or both versions running at the same time. But if I refresh things here, I don't know, let me go to the console, but things still look pretty okay. Type in Orlando, you get a preview on there, Little Rock, everything's good, so that's cool. Already got like 5 of these windows going here. All right, so not too bad. I think, was there anything else I had to do? No, I think that's it. So upgrade adapter. So now we're running Angular 2 within our app. We don't have any Angular 2 components yet, but Angular 2 is in there. It's just ready and waiting for us to get things going. So let me show you a couple of slides before we start wrapping this up and actually doing the fun part, which will only take a second because it's kind of easy, I'm not gonna lie. So let's start writing our first Angular 2 component. So now we're converting the preview weather directive, Angular 1 directive, into a component, Angular 2 component. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we're going to write a weather preview class. Every component in Angular 2 is a class. That's a little different than how things worked in Angular 1. So we'll be, just renaming the weather-preview file from js.ts. Again, this will help us keep track what has been upgraded, what has not. So then we'll go ahead and declare, add the component annotation to it, and let's just get it to run. Let's just get it to run. So let's just get it to say, hello from Angular 2. That's my go for this. And once we get things all situated, we'll have to make sure that we're able to access that component from the Angular 1 templates. So by using that selector, that same weather preview selector, we want to make sure that we're getting the component and not, just the old directive that we had going. So let's do that. Let's do that real quick. Let's do both of these in the live demo. And again, I promise I'm almost done. Hopefully you're not falling asleep on me just yet. All right, let's get things started over on the console. Oops. We good? All right. So with this one, we'll start with renaming. So if we go in here, we got weatherpreview.js. We like it to be weatherpreview.ts instead. So let's go up here and just give it a new extension. Oops. So did it work? Yep. So if I, save it, things should still work just fine. When we include it from our index.js, we're just including it by using the name and not the extension, so nothing we need to change there. It just picks it up because of TypeScript, so that's cool. So notice we are exporting a weather preview from the weather preview file. So let's just comment all this out. This was the Angular 1 version, and let's start working on the Angular 2 version of things. So we need to get a component from the Angular core libraries and start declaring it. So for this component, we're going to need a selector. So that will be weather preview, just like our last one. And it'll also need a template. I just wanted to say hello from Angular 2. So cool. And then we'll have to export a class, give it the class weather preview, and just need an opening and closing statement. So cool. So exported that. This is the basics of an Angular 2 component right here. If you've never seen any Angular 2 code before, this is the basis of it all. Has anybody here seen this before? No, first time? First time? Cool. All right, so this is Angular Chew, meet crowd. There we go. Yeah, thank you. Whew, sorry, I was falling asleep here myself. Thank you. All right, so on index.js now, notice our app just broke. It just stopped running. There's something wrong. What is up? Some weird error here, but since we're in the middle of process of upgrading, we kind of know that something's up with Angular 2. Well, as it turns out, if we want to use an Angular 2 component as a directive in Angular 1, we have to manually upgrade it. So we'll do that by just wrapping it with a little function. So first, we'll import the same upgrade adapter. So NG2 upgrade, the same thing, the same instance that we imported on the other file, we're importing here as well. So the NG2 upgrade, is that what it was? Yep, NG2 upgrade. And we're going to call Angular, so upgrade adapter dot, all right, downgrade NG2 components. And we need to pass in the instance of that component. Ooh, sorry if this looks confusing. Let me make the screen a little larger. This is a really long method name, but what this does is it downgrades an Angular 2 component into an Angular 1 directive. So hopefully things will get going here on the left side, and this will be all that we have had to do. We want to make sure we see hello from, still compiling, hello from, what was it that I said it as? From Angular 2. So if we see this, then we're successful. We're doing pretty well so far. And turns out that we're not very successful. So what's going on? Let's see. Oh, I forgot one step. I'm sorry. On the upgrade adapter, this will look a little obscure to you. I apologize, but I need to also pass that component, the weather preview, to our list of declarations in our module. It's something with Angular these days, so something you'll be exposed to as well as you really start getting into Angular. So declarations, that should be it right here. I almost forgot about this step. But this is, so just so you all understand what I just did, I'm importing the component into the upgrade, and I'm also letting Angular 2 know that that component exists. Notice that we didn't, much like Angular 1, how we're passing, this is, hey, I want to create a controller. This is the name of that controller, and this is, the reference variable for that. We're essentially doing the same thing in Angular 2, but with a different syntax. We're just letting Angular 2 know that that component exists. Once we know it exists, it'll be able to be used on both sides, on Angular 1, both on Angular 1 and Angular 2. And there we go. We're seeing hello from Angular 2, so that's good. That's what we wanted. So thank you, Angular. Awesome. I believe that was it for this one, so let's just finish upgrading. This is not really what the directive looked like before. It's just a dummy directive, or a dummy component now. So let's get working on what we need to do to get it to where it needs to be. So yeah, we have a dummy component now. What do we do? Well, the first thing we want to do is make it accept arguments. Remember, I was passing in the weather object into our directive, and that made things look pretty okay. That we're going to do the equivalent of that in Angular 2. Now, the syntax looks a little bit different for that. Instead of using scope, we're going to be using something called input. And then once we're done with that, and just making sure that we're able to receive arguments from Angular 1 into Angular 2, we'll start porting over the previous template that we had. And let's just do these two real quick. And I believe that this is the last demo that we have today before we get going. I told you I'm almost done, I promise. So let's see. So start with going into weather preview again. And now we'll also import input from it. Now here, as an input, we want to say we want the weather property. Why weather? Well, if we look back into main.html, that's what we were passing in as an argument over to this directive now turned into component. So we want to make sure that the component is listening to this thing. And if it is here, we will be able to just read it in on here. So let's just show it as a little JSON thing. So should be getting an input, an argument from somewhere else being passed to it. And when it does, we will see what what the value of that thing is. Is it done compiling yet? Let's give it a second. There we go. So we got something, and it's vm.weather. Why is it that? Oh, that's what we're passing in, and it's receiving that as a string for some reason. Reason for that is because in the Angular choose syntax for passing dynamic properties, we also call it binding, is we need to give it square brackets. That's when we really need to start getting into Angular chew and the syntax of that and how that works. So anytime we have the square brackets on there, we'll know that it's going to be a dynamic thing and not just a literal string thing. Now again, if you wanted to pass in strings, that's fine. You just don't need to have the square brackets around it. Now, interesting, it says null now, and it turns out that's exactly what we wanted. If we look at the main controller, the vm.weather starts out as null, but then when we make a search, so where is it? Yeah, on search change, then we'll set the vm.weather as the information we got from the API. So ideally, this is now null, but when we type in Orlando, then after 600 milliseconds, we'll reach out to the API and we'll have this big old JSON thing here. This is exactly what we wanted. So now we're able to start bringing in the previous template and just converting all of that into Angular true syntax, and we'll get going. We'll be out of here. So let's do that. So, oops. Don't need to set this twice here. So the first thing that stands out to me here is ng-if. This is an Angular 1 specific syntax. In Angular 2, this is called a structural directive, and this is what that looks like. Star ng-if. And also, I'm going to get this icon out of here because I'm going to teach. I'll explain why in just a little bit. But now we should be getting ng-if, a weather. Next thing we got to get rid of is this number. This number filter on Angular 1 just doesn't exist anymore in Angular 2. And tell you the truth, because of how the data is now formatted from the API, we don't really need it anymore, but it's one of those things to be aware of. Existed in Angular 1, not any longer on Angular 2. Then the other thing is this UI sref directive does not work within Angular 2 as well. And what this did for us, it formatted the route for us so that when the name of the city popped up in the bottom here, we were able to click on it. So let's just build that manually real quick. It should only take a second. So it should be href. Let me zoom out again. So if I go into the routes, it should be country code and then search term. Weather, country code, search term. So let's do that. So just weather. So country code will be what we had over here, weather.location.country, and search term will be weather.location.city. Oops. Grr. Can get rid of this whole thing, and the button should still look the same. Save. Thank you. All right, are things compiling here on the left yet? Yes, they are. So things should be working. Oh my gosh, please do. Cool, so Little Rock. Voila, so things are looking just as they were before, except that we're now using Angular 2 code for this instead of Angular 1. So our app is officially upgraded. The reason I commented out the icon on here was because we needed to use a service, the weather service, to get the icon for it. And to get the service, we would need to do a dependency injection on it like we did on Angular 1. There is a way to do it, but it is going to take a couple of minutes, and I feel like we've been going a little long, so I might stop right here and let you check out the code on your own if you're interested later, if that's okay. So just do some closing remarks so we can all be out of here. So what are the pros and cons? Pros and cons of this approach, right? So this is definitely not an exhaustive list at all, but there are a couple of things to keep in mind. The one that's really important to me is that it's somewhat low risk. As you all saw, we just upgraded one part of our app and not the whole thing. So it's not like we need to, redo, everything, which kind of brings me to the next point. There's not a full rewrite needed. We're just upgrading very specific parts of our code, and ideally, it won't break other parts of it at all. So that's pretty cool in my opinion. And with that, you get to preserve a lot of your current architecture. You get to gradually do things and not have to, do this full overhaul of things. So those are the pros. The cons is that the build process, as you all saw, it takes a little longer now to compile to execute a build system, to execute the build file for us of the whole thing. The reason for that was true, right? Now we're using TypeScript, which does a whole lot more work than just Babel by itself did. And also Angular 2. Angular 2 is, just a bundle of a lot of different libraries, so it's a lot more dependencies. Again, brings me to my next point. There was a significant file increase. So our whole bundle, everything before was 200 kilobytes, and it's now 800 kilobytes because of Angular 2. So, it's not astronomical, but it's pretty significant. Definitely something to think about. Now, the cool thing is that it's not going to be increasing much more than 800 kilobytes. That's just what the size of the Angular 2 libraries are. So, on top of that, it'll just be your application code. It's not, just growing astronomically as you're adding more things. And some libraries that you might be using today just aren't upgradable at all. Unfortunately, Angular Material was one of them. They're actually making a whole new version of Angular Material that works fully with Angular 2, but it's just a little bit harder to do the gradual upgrade with that. What are some next steps I would take after this? Well, I would migrate more directives for starters. We just did one of them. So definitely would take advantage of more libraries or more directives that could be upgraded more easily. Also, use a more Angular 1.x component-based architecture instead of just co-controllers and routes like we did with UI router and whatnot back in the day. So that's one thing that I would definitely start moving towards, because that's just how Angular 2 works. And then I would just migrate the rest of our application to be a fully fledged Angular 2 application, including the router and everything. And I would definitely use a better module system. Browserify is just a little bit dated these days, so something a little bit more modern that supports more of the latest features of the language. Something like Webpack, maybe that allows us to split our bundle into multiple files to lazy load things, so we don't have that single 800 kilobyte hit. It's a per need per route basis kind of thing. And that would be it. Thank you so much for watching. If you are interested in learning more about Angular 2, we do have a course on there on codeschool.com on Angular 2. Feel free to check that out. Feel free to follow me on Twitter and ask me more questions on there. I'm #Serge, a weird name, I know, but #Serge on Twitter. Again, I'm Sergio Cruz, developer and instructor at Code School. Hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.